The valley looked untouched, as though a quiet hand had simply pressed pause on life. Tables in the long hall were still laid out, wooden bowls half filled with broth turned cold, bread torn but not eaten. Lamps burned steadily despite the daylight, their flames flickering as if disturbed by breathless whispers. And yet no voices came, no feet shuffled across the worn floors. The Shaker village of Harmony Hollow had emptied itself, leaving behind only absence like a wound in the fabric of the living. Dr. Elias Corbin, a physician from Bangor who had long studied the peculiar fervor of religious communities, was summoned when word of the disappearance spread. He expected epidemic, perhaps a fever that forced the faithful into isolation. Instead, he found silence so thick it pressed against the chest. His notes described his first impression with clinical restraint. Order without the ordered, preparedness without the prepared. Every sign of recent habitation, but no trace of humanity. It is as though life here was rehearsed and then abandoned mid-performance. At first, he considered rational explanations. Perhaps they had fled a storm, though the sky showed only calm. Perhaps they had moved deeper into the woods, though no tracks marked the damp earth around the meeting house. It was the lamps that troubled him most. Why would they waste precious oil? A community of this discipline would not have been careless. Something else had intervened. Midway through his inspection, he noticed the hymnal books on the benches. Each was open to the same page, the lyrics to a song he had never encountered in their previous gatherings. The words were written in the familiar Shaker script, yet oddly altered. Several lines appeared almost like incantations, repetitions not of worship, but of command. He jotted them down, uncertain whether it was invention or madness that had crept into their ritual. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote, for it was unlike anything the devoutly simple sect would allow. Hours passed as he searched the small homes. He found a cradle rocking gently, though no draft stirred the air. A needle left threaded in cloth, the seam half-stitched. In one dwelling, an unfinished letter rested on the table, the ink smear still wet enough to smudge under his finger. It spoke of unease in the nights preceding the disappearance, of voices outside the window and footsteps circling the house, though the writer dared not wake the others to confirm. It was at dusk that Elias felt the first stirrings of dread he could not intellectualize. The valley seemed to listen to him, as though aware of his solitary presence. Crows gathered on the rafters, silent rather than calling, their heads all turned toward him in unnatural unison. He wrote later in his journal, "I could not shake the impression that I was trespassing upon ground recently claimed by something unseen, not emptied by choice, but by force." The sheriff, arriving with 2 deputies, dismissed his unease as nerves. They packed up, went off together. These people were always strange. Yet he could not explain the still warm food or the working lamps. Nor could he answer why no belongings had been taken, why clothes remained folded neatly in drawers, why shoes rested by doors awaiting feet that never came. Elias knew that explanations this simple were convenient, but not true. That night, as he prepared to leave, he noticed a single phrase scratched into the wood of the meeting house door. It was carved hastily, as if in desperation, and it was the only English writing among the otherwise sacred surroundings. The message read, "Do not follow." But as the door closed behind him, it became clear he wasn't alone. Elias felt it before he turned, a subtle shift in the air, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The deputies had returned to the wagon, their laughter carrying faintly across the valley, yet inside the meeting house the silence was heavier than before. He pivoted slowly, his lantern beams sweeping across empty benches. Nothing stirred, and yet the pressure in his chest deepened, as if some invisible presence leaned closer with each passing second. What unsettled him most was not fear of attack, but the notion of expectation. Something in that hall seemed to wait for him, to measure his reactions, and in that waiting, Elias recognized the same feeling he had experienced in hospitals when a patient lingered between life and death, an edge where unseen forces decided outcomes. His medical mind rejected superstition, but the unease pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. When he stepped outside, the deputies were gone. The wagon tracks ended abruptly at the tree line, as though swallowed by the forest. His pulse quickened. Elias considered the possibility they had taken fright and driven off without him, but the absence of tracks disturbed him more than their sudden departure. He crouched low, running his hand across the soil, freshly damp from evening dew. No indentation, no trail. The wagon had not left, it had ceased to exist. Halfway back toward the houses, he noticed a dog sitting in the dirt, a shaggy farm animal, ribs visible, eyes alert. It didn't bark or move, merely stared. Animals, Elias reflected, often betray truths people ignore. He approached cautiously, but the creature did not retreat. Instead, it tilted its head towards the forest, then back at Elias, as though urging him to follow. For a brief moment he contemplated obedience. Curiosity was his curse, the same trait that had driven him into forgotten clinics and madhouses in search of hidden causes. But something in the dog's steady gaze told him the forest was no refuge. It was warning, not invitation. Inside one of the cottages, he found a Bible lying open, not on a table, but on the floor, the pages creased as if dropped mid-ritual. Margins were filled with annotations, not the tidy handwriting of study, but frantic scrawls. "He listens," one read, "not the God we name, but the one who answers when we sing wrong." The physician's rational instincts battled with the raw suggestion of possession, or perhaps mania spreading through a fragile community. Yet even madness leaves bodies behind. At midnight, Elias tried to sleep in the meeting house, determined to keep himself steady for the investigations that would follow. But rest proved impossible. Faint humming drifted through the walls, a low, tuneless vibration. He pressed his ear to the boards. The sound was beneath the floor. He considered lifting the planks, but stopped. Overcome by an intuition he rarely trusted in himself. "If you open it, you will not close it again." He left the boards untouched, writing in his notebook by trembling lamplight. "The true disease of this place may not be physical, but it spreads with equal certainty. I feel it searching for entry." At dawn, he emerged to find the dog still waiting. Its fur was damp with morning mist, its eyes weary but insistent. Then, without sound, it stood and walked toward the river at the valley's edge. Elias followed this time, unable to resist. The river ran unusually high, carrying branches and debris, though there had been no storm. On the bank, he discovered something that froze him in place. A child's shoe, wedged between two stones, damp but not yet waterlogged. Nearby, a second shoe, smaller still, lay overturned. The footprints around them led nowhere. He bent down, reaching to collect the evidence, when the dog let out a single, sharp bark. Elias looked up. Standing across the river was a figure in a plain Shaker dress, motionless, watching him. And as the mist lifted from the water, he realized the figure had no face. The vision stood perfectly still, a silhouette in a plain linen dress, hair pinned in the neat style of the Shakers. Yet where the contours of a face should have been, there was only smoothness, like wax unshaped. Elias blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, but the featureless presence remained. The dog beside him growled low, hackles raised, though its growl was more a warning of inevitability than defense. Elias wanted to call out, to demand explanation, but his voice faltered. His throat was dry, as if the air had thickened. The faceless figure did not move closer. It merely raised its arm, pointing not at him, but behind. He spun quickly, nothing. When he turned back to the river, the figure was gone. Only the mist clung to the water, leaving behind the disturbing certainty that someone or something had acknowledged him. Back in the meeting house, his notebook received another frantic entry. The apparition lacked identity, yet conveyed intent. This was no hallucination born of fatigue. I am being shown what they saw. He pressed the pen harder than he realized, the ink blotting on the page like spilled blood. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a survivor attempting disguise, a mask, but the absence of eyes haunted him more than any deception could. By mid-morning, Elias began to suspect he was not the only witness. He walked the periphery of the village, speaking aloud in case someone lingered in hiding. At the edge of the fields, he discovered fresh disturbances in the soil. Not footprints this time, but long drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled away. Strangely, they did not lead into the woods. They ended abruptly in open ground, vanishing into nothing. Here, his clinical mind fractured further. He considered mass hysteria followed by coordinated disappearance. He considered violence from an external group, though the absence of struggle contradicted it. He even considered plague, but no signs of illness remained. Yet always the same conclusion returned. Whatever occurred was not natural evacuation. Something had taken them. By the third night, Elias realized he was being tested. The humming beneath the floorboards returned, louder, more insistent. It vibrated into his bones until he felt it in his teeth. Unable to endure, he pried one board loose with trembling hands. Beneath, he found not dirt but a hollow space. Inside lay small objects, a carved wooden dove, a length of braided hair tied with ribbon, a child's toy horse, relics of lives carefully placed as if buried in offering. He shuddered, struck by the thought that these were not forgotten. They were surrendered. In his journal, he wrote, "The community performed a ritual not in their scripture. These objects are not abandoned. They are sacrificed. For what, I cannot yet say." When he replaced the board, he felt again that waiting presence, as if the entire valley leaned closer. That night he barely slept, and when he did, he dreamed of the faceless figure standing beside his bed, hand resting lightly upon his chest as though measuring his breath. He woke, gasping, drenched in cold sweat, convinced that dream and waking life had blurred. At dawn, he followed the dog again, compelled by a sense of grim partnership. This time, it led him not to the river, but to the graveyard at the far edge of the village. The Shakers had always buried their dead with simplicity. Plain markers, no adornments. Yet the earth was disturbed, fresh mounds rising unevenly where there had been none before. Elias knelt, his hand trembling as he brushed away loose soil from one of the shallow heaps. A scrap of cloth emerged unmistakably from the uniform Shaker garb. Beneath it, he felt not the hardness of coffin wood, but the yielding coldness of flesh. The ground was not filled with those who had died years before. It held the recently taken. And as Elias recoiled from the grave, he realized something inside had just moved. His first instinct was to run, yet his training held him there, locked in a dreadful standoff with the soil itself. The mound shifted faintly, a ripple across its surface as though the earth were breathing. He pressed his ear closer against the ground, horrified by his own compulsion to know. From beneath, muffled and weak, came a sound no rational mind could mistake. The faint scrape of fingernails dragging against wood or stone, or perhaps against nothing at all. He staggered back, heart pounding. The Shakers were not gone. They were buried, but not dead. The realization crashed against his medical reason, a contradiction too grotesque to accept. No community would willingly enter its members alive, and yet the evidence lay at his feet. Elias forced himself to lift more soil from the disturbed mound. Beneath the first inches of earth, his fingers caught the edge of fabric again. He pulled, expecting resistance, but instead, The fabric tore free, as if whoever lay beneath had already decayed beyond solidity. The stench of damp linen clung to him, though not the stench of death. He realized with dread that clenched his stomach that there was no corpse beneath, only fragments, disintegrated matter, as though flesh had melted into the soil itself. The dog whined sharply, pulling him from paralysis. Its eyes were fixed not on the mound he disturbed, but on another one a few yards away. That mound trembled more violently, jerking in pulses until the soil cracked open and a pale hand thrust upward, fingers clawing at the air. Elias stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a stone marker. He could not breathe. His journal, later smudged with dirt and sweat, contained only a frantic scrawl of that moment. The dead are not dead. The living are not living. Something between has claimed them. The physician's thoughts fractured between duty and terror. Should he dig them out, attempt to revive? But the hand withdrew suddenly, collapsing back into the grave as if pulled from beneath. The soil sealed over once more, unnaturally swift, leaving only the disturbed imprint of its brief emergence. The graveyard fell still again. Shaken, Elias staggered back to the meeting house, determined to flee the valley altogether. Yet as he approached, he saw smoke rising from one of the chimneys. The houses had been cold when he arrived, untouched by fire for days. Now thick black smoke curled into the pale morning sky. He rushed to the cottage, his rational mind clinging to the hope of survivors. Inside, the hearth blazed with unnatural fury, though no wood fed the flames. A low hum resonated from the fire itself, the same tune he had heard through the floorboards at night. Upon the mantel lay 3 new objects: a child's bonnet, a pair of spectacles, and a worn, leather-bound journal, items not present the day before. He touched the book hesitantly, opening it to find page after page of meticulous handwriting. The entries began with hymns, then shifted abruptly to fragmented sentences. "We were chosen, we were called to descend. He waits below the soil. To refuse is to be unmade." Elias closed the book with trembling hands, realizing the Shakers had not been victims but participants in something larger, darker, and perhaps voluntary. They had given themselves to whatever force dwelled beneath the valley. Yet the hand that emerged from the grave suggested regret. Perhaps not all had agreed. The dog barked again, this time from the threshold. Elias followed its gaze. Across the road, in the shadow of another cottage, stood the faceless figure once more. But now it was not alone. Behind it, row upon row of other shapes gathered, men, women, even children, all faceless, all silent, watching him. And as the faceless congregation swayed in unison, Elias realized they were waiting for him to join. The stillness of their movements unsettled him more than violence ever could. No sound of breath, no rustle of fabric, only the synchronized, slow sway, like trees moved by a wind that did not exist. Elias clutched his lantern tighter, its flame quivering as though aware of the crowd. His instinct screamed at him to run, yet another part of him, colder, darker, felt the strange pull of their rhythm. It was hypnotic, almost tender in its beckoning. He stepped back toward the meeting house, every muscle taut. The figures did not follow, but their heads, though faceless, tilted in perfect unison to watch him retreat. He realized then that their expectation was not passive. It was patient. They believed he would come willingly, sooner or later. Inside, Elias tried to anchor himself in reason. He scribbled notes in his journal, each line more frantic than the last. They are not apparitions. They move as bodies do. Yet the absence of faces denies them identity, community without self, devotion without thought. Is this the final act of Shaker obedience, obliteration of the individual? His pen snapped under the pressure of his hand. Midway through the night, the dog stirred suddenly, growling towards the window. Elias froze. Outside, Faint shapes moved across the fields, pacing the edges of the village. They did not advance. They circled, like sentries. The dog's growl deepened until Elias feared it would draw them closer. He whispered for silence, heart hammering as one figure paused directly at the window. Faceless, it leaned close as though scenting him through the glass. Then, with agonizing slowness, it turned and rejoined the silent procession. Elias did not sleep. At dawn, desperate for clarity, he opened the journal he had found by the fire once more. This time he read deeper, between the hymns and fragmented phrases. One passage repeated, "To descend is to shed self. To shed self is to be filled." He rises in the faceless. He consumes and gives voice. The repetition suggested ritual chant, but Elias's medical instincts screamed otherwise. This was indoctrination, a community dissolving into something beyond its own volition. The dog barked again, insistent this time, leading Elias once more to the graveyard. He resisted, trembling, but followed. There, in the morning light, he found new disturbances. The mounds he had seen yesterday were gone, smoothed flat as though no burial had occurred. In their place, faint depressions formed symbols, circles intersected by lines, crude but deliberate. Elias sketched them quickly, though his hand shook. He recognized none, yet the precision suggested knowledge older than scripture. As he stood over the markings, a sound rose from the trees. At first, a hum, then words, though not in English nor any language he recognized. It was a chant, many voices layered into one, seeping through the mist. He turned sharply, and in the shadows of the forest edge, he saw them. The congregation again, swaying, faceless, whispering in rhythm. His skin prickled with dread, but also with an involuntary urge to join. He stumbled back to the meeting house, clutching his journal like a lifeline. Inside, he collapsed into a bench, whispering aloud to no one. "They want me to surrender, to forget myself. That is the cost." His own voice sounded foreign, echoing strangely against the wooden walls. Suddenly, the humming returned beneath the floorboards, deeper, more insistent. The planks shuddered, and through the gaps seeped a dim glow, pale as moonlight. Elias stood, paralyzed, as the floor bulged upward as though something beneath was pressing to emerge. And when the first plank cracked under the force, Elias understood. It was trying to rise into the room. The sound was unlike any wood he had ever heard break. It wasn't a clean snap, but a groan, stretched and strained, as if the timber resisted not gravity but intention. His lantern flickered violently, throwing spasms of light across the walls. Elias backed toward the doorway, unable to drag his eyes from the swelling boards. Something pushed from beneath, steady, deliberate, with the patience of something that had always known this moment would come. The dog barked furiously, pacing in circles, its claws scraping the floor. Elias clutched his journal tight to his chest. He considered fleeing into the open air, yet some grim sense told him the congregation waited outside, patient and faceless. To step out would be to step into their ranks. He was trapped between two hungers, one beneath, one beyond. The plank split with a sharp crack, releasing a pale mist that coiled upward like breath. The smell was metallic, neither decay nor smoke, but something harsher. Ozone and iron mingled. Elias gagged, raising his sleeve to his nose. Through the widening gap, he glimpsed movement. Not hands, not limbs, but a shifting surface, liquid yet solid, shimmering as though it borrowed shape only when pressed. His medical mind clung to terminology: plasma, aberrant matter, natural gas igniting. But these words rang hollow even in thought. He knew instinctively this was no phenomenon of science. It was will, something that had demanded devotion until the Shakers gave themselves fully. In his notes, written later with shaking, hand, he tried to reason. They did not vanish, they were absorbed. This presence beneath the soil thrives on surrender. In yielding identity, they are remade, faceless, obedient. Yet in that moment, all reason dissolved into one primal instinct: survival. Suddenly the boards ceased their movement. The mist hung in the air, curling around him, then slowly receded into the fissure. The wood groaned back into place as if sealed by unseen hands. Silence fell. Elias collapsed onto a bench, drenched in sweat, heart pounding against his ribs. The silence did not comfort him. It was the silence of pause, not conclusion, the same dreadful stillness he had sensed upon first arriving in the valley. Something beneath had tested him, found him wanting or waiting, and had withdrawn only temporarily. By dawn, Elias resolved to leave. He packed his satchel with trembling efficiency, journal secure, lantern trimmed. Yet when he stepped outside, the road that had led into Harmony Hollow no longer existed. Where wagon tracks had cut through the valley, there was now only wild undergrowth, as if decades had passed in a single night. He hacked at the vines with his walking stick, but the growth thickened with each strike, relentless, swallowing the path back to the world. In despair, he turned back towards the village and froze. On the steps of the meeting house sat one of the faceless figures, waiting. Unlike the congregation before, this one did not sway. It sat motionless, head tilted as though regarding him with eyes it did not possess. The dog whimpered low, backing away. The figure raised its hand slowly, palm outward. Upon the skinless surface appeared faint markings, scratches, lines drawn by desperate hands. Elias stepped closer despite himself, straining to read. They were words, not scripture, not chant, a warning carved deep. Not all chose. Some resisted. Help us. The faceless figure lowered its hand, and for the first time Elias felt pity rather than fear. Whatever it was now, it had once been a person who had begged not to surrender. The congregation was not uniform obedience. Within it lingered fragments of defiance, smothered, but not erased. As Elias stood trembling, the figure tilted its head further, then opened its mouth. No lips moved, no voice emerged, yet a whisper threaded into his skull directly, alien yet pleading, and in that whisper Elias heard his own name. The sound, or rather the sensation, slid into his mind with a chill that no human voice could carry. It was not spoken, yet it was undeniable. His name, Elias Corbin, pressed into him like a brand. He stumbled back, clutching at his temples, half expecting blood to seep from his ears. The faceless figure did not move, but he felt its stare intensify in ways that defied anatomy. "Help us," the whisper came again, weaker now, fading as though the act of speaking cost it dearly. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Could it be that within these emptied husks some consciousness endured? If so, then the horror of the Shaker's fate deepened tenfold. To live without a face, without a name, and still feel the memory of the self burning beneath, it was torment disguised as worship. He reached out, trembling, toward the figure's hand, but before contact was made, it recoiled sharply, as if yanked backward by unseen force. Its body convulsed, jerking in unnatural spasms, before it collapsed into stillness. The markings on its palm, the desperate plea, faded into smooth nothingness. Elias felt a cold certainty. The defiance had been noticed, and it had been punished. The dog barked frantically, snapping him back to movement. He retreated into the cottage, bolting the door, though some part of him knew no bolt could bar what ruled this place. He wrote furiously in his journal, words spilling as quickly as his trembling hand could form them. There is resistance within the faceless. The obliteration is not absolute. Some cling to identity even as it is stripped. This is both hope and terror. For what can I offer them when I cannot even free myself? Hours dragged as he sat, listening to the oppressive quiet. Each tick of his pocket watch seemed too loud, as though marking time in a place where time no longer functioned. By evening, a new sound came. the beating of drums, low and distant. He rose, peering from the window. Across the fields, the congregation had gathered once more, swaying in their hypnotic rhythm, but now their movements were accompanied by the pulse of drums, slow, insistent, like a heartbeat magnified across the valley. Elias watched, unable to look away. The rhythm seeped into his body, his own heart beginning to fall into step with theirs. His hands shook violently, and he forced himself to press a knife against his palm, the sting of pain anchoring him to himself. Blood welled up, and only then did the trance lessen. He realized with chilling clarity the ritual sought to erase not just faces but wills. Desperate for distance, he ventured into the forest. The dog stayed close, leading him along faint paths until they came upon a clearing. There, hidden among the trees, he discovered a pit. Inside lay dozens of objects, personal belongings, offerings perhaps. Yet these were different from the ones he had found beneath the floorboards. These bore marks of rejection, a prayer book torn in half, a carved cross split down the middle, a child's doll burned black at the edges. They were remnants of resistance, discarded violently as though the valley itself had spat them out. He knelt, lifting the charred doll with trembling fingers. Someone here had refused to surrender fully, and their traces endured. It was proof that rebellion was possible, but also dangerous. As he turned the doll over, he noticed faint letters scratched into the fabric beneath the soot. 2 words, crude but unmistakable: "Not him." The dog growled suddenly, ears flat. Elias looked up. Across the clearing, between the trees, the faceless congregation had formed a silent half-circle, watching him. And at their center stood one figure taller than the rest, its faceless head crowned with branches, its shoulders draped in what looked like woven roots. And when that crowned figure raised its hand toward him, Elias felt the command to kneel. The weight of it pressed down not on his shoulders, but in his mind, an invisible hand forcing his knees to buckle. He fought against it, jaw clenched, every muscle trembling with resistance. His pride as a physician, his stubborn devotion to rational thought, both rebelled against the humiliation of surrender. But the pressure mounted, insistent and patient, like an ocean tide wearing down stone. His legs shook, threatening collapse. The dog snarled at his side, baring teeth, breaking the trance for an instant. Elias gasped, stumbling backward, his knees narrowly avoiding the earth. He shouted hoarsely, "No!" though his voice cracked under the strain. The faceless congregation did not react. They swayed on, timeless, indifferent. Only the crowned figure stood rigid, its hand still outstretched. Elias scribbled later in his journal with desperate haste, "The faceless are not merely erased, they are conduits. This crowned one commands them, and through them it attempts dominion over me. Their will is not their own. This is not religion, it is conquest." He fled the clearing, branches whipping his face, the dog leading him blindly through the darkened forest. The sound of drums followed, pulsing, echoing in his skull, though his ears heard only silence. He ran until his lungs burned, until the trees parted to reveal the village once again. The houses loomed unchanged, yet now their windows glowed faintly, though no lamps had been lit. Compelled by both terror and duty, Elias forced himself into one of the cottages he had not yet searched. Inside, dust lay heavy, but in the center of the room, a table had been set with new objects, sketches, dozens of them, drawn in frantic charcoal strokes. Each depicted the crowned figure, its root crown growing larger in each image, its faceless head looming above the village. But scattered among these drawings were others, portraits of familiar faces, Shaker men and women, rendered with careful detail. Each face was scratched out violently, erased into smudges. One drawing remained untouched, his own likeness, his sharp nose, his weary eyes, his hair, swept back from his brow, all captured perfectly. Beneath it, a single word written in block letters: "Next." Elias recoiled, bile rising in his throat. He shoved the papers aside, breath ragged, until another discovery rooted him to the spot. On a nearby shelf rested journals, not his own, but bound in the same leather. Their spines bore names he recognized from Shaker families. Inside, each was filled with accounts of dreams, visions, voices beneath the soil. They had documented their descent into this faceless worship, step by careful step, and always at the margin of the final pages, the same scrawled warning, "Do not follow." A chill settled deep in his chest. They had known, they had tried to resist, and still they were taken. The dog whined suddenly, scratching at the door. Elias turned and froze. Standing in the doorway, framed by the pale light of dawn, was the crowned figure itself. Its height filled the frame, its woven crown scraping the lintel. Behind it, the congregation massed, silent as stone. Elias clutched his lantern like a weapon, though he knew it would do nothing. The crowned figure raised its hand again, and the pressure returned, crushing his will. This time, however, something new pierced the oppression. A faint, human cry. It came not from the faceless, but from beneath the floorboards, muffled but distinct, a plea for help. And as Elias heard that buried voice, he realized someone down there was still alive. The realization jolted through him like fire, snapping his paralysis. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against the warped planks. There it was again. Muffled words, fragmented but undeniably human. The cry carried fear, desperation, but also resistance. Whoever they were, they had not been erased into faceless silence. The crowned figure loomed at the threshold, unmoving, its congregation swaying faintly behind. Yet it made no attempt to stop him. Instead, Elias sensed the same dreadful patience as before, as if this act of discovery was not defiance, but part of its design. Still, his physician's duty cut through terror. If someone lived beneath, he could not abandon them. He tore at the boards with frantic strength, splinters slicing his palms. The dog barked and whined beside him as though urging speed. At last, one plank gave way, revealing darkness below. He lowered his lantern, the flame casting quivering light into the hollow. Shadows shifted, then eyes glinted up at him. Human eyes, wide with terror, yet undeniably alive. "Please," a voice rasped. It was a woman's, hoarse from thirst. "Don't let it take me." Elias reached down, gripping her trembling hand. He pulled with all his strength, dragging her from the void beneath the house. She collapsed onto the floorboards, coughing, clutching her chest. Her face was pale, but still her own. No smoothness, no erasure. She was whole. For now, the congregation outside swayed faster as though stirred by her emergence. Elias shielded her instinctively, glaring at the crowned figure. It did not advance. Instead, it tilted its faceless head, crown of roots quivering faintly. A silent exchange passed between them, though Elias could not interpret it. His journal later recorded, "The crowned one permits survival only to a point. It allows glimpses of resistance not to spare them, but to torment them. It feeds on the struggle between will and surrender." The woman's breath, steadied enough for words. "They buried us alive. Those who wouldn't kneel. Some gave in, some didn't. The ground takes the rest." Her eyes darted toward the crowned figure. "It won't let me go. None of us." Elias fought down nausea. The Shakers had not simply vanished. They had been divided, consumed selectively, absorbed into the faceless order, or cast into the earth as punishment. Those who clung to identity lingered, tormented, trapped between life and whatever waited below. The woman gripped his sleeve with desperate strength. "Burn it," she whispered. "The meeting house, the crown. Fire's the only thing it fears." The suggestion sent a shock through him. Fire, symbol of purification, of destruction, against something that thrived in soil, shadow, and silence. Perhaps she was right, but as he considered it, the crowned figure raised its hand once more, this time not toward him, but toward the woman. She convulsed violently, screaming, her features blurring as if invisible hands pressed upon her face. Elias held her, shouting, "Stay with me! Fight it!" For a brief moment, her scream broke through the invisible grip. Her features snapped back, though streaked with tears. She gasped, "Run! Before it—" The words cut off. Her body went rigid in his arms. The dog barked furiously, snapping its teeth at the crowned figure. Elias staggered back, dragging her limp body toward the rear of the house. But as he reached the back door, her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, once human, were now blank white. She rose without sound, her movements no longer her own. And as Elias backed away, he understood with dread. The woman he had saved was already gone. Her body moved stiffly, jerking like a puppet whose strings were tugged by unseen hands. The pale glaze of her eyes reflected the lantern's trembling flame, but no recognition lingered there. She reached toward him, not in plea but in claim, her fingers curling like hooks. Elias's breath caught. The woman he had dragged from the pit had been consumed in moments, claimed by the same force that commanded the faceless congregation. He stumbled backward, his mind racing. Saving her had not been an act of mercy. It had been a demonstration, orchestrated by the crowned figure to show him that resistance was futile. His own compassion had been twisted into another performance for its amusement. His journal entry, scrawled hours later, captured his horror. "I am not battling death, nor madness, but a hunger that reshapes devotion into puppetry. It knows my instinct to heal and uses it against me." The dog snarled at the woman's slow advance, baring its teeth. Elias, trembling, forced himself to lift the lantern higher, light spilling across her face. For an instant, the smoothness wavered. Features flickered like candlelight in a draught, her lips shaping soundless words. "Run." Then the blankness returned, and she lunged. He hurled the lantern instinctively. Glass shattered, flame leaping across the floor. The woman shrieked, not in voice, but in an echo that tore through his skull. Her form convulsed in the fire, limbs jerking violently, until at last she collapsed into the flames. The crowned figure at the threshold tilted its head, watching without intervention. For the first time, Elias thought he glimpsed hesitation in its faceless stillness. Fire had heard it. The blaze spread quickly, licking at the walls. Smoke filled his lungs, driving him into the night air. Behind him, the cottage roared with fire, orange light spilling across the silent congregation. They did not move to help. They did not move at all. They simply stood, swaying faintly, as though fire itself was another part of the ritual. But the crowned figure stepped back. Its root crown smoldered where stray sparks had landed. Its faceless head turned sharply toward Elias, and for the first time he felt not only pressure but rage. The dog barked wildly, urging him away, and together they fled through the smoke toward the meeting house. Inside, coughing and gasping, Elias spread his journal across the altar table. He forced himself into clinical clarity. He wrote, "Pattern of control established. Surrender, burial, erasure. Resistance punished by transformation or death. Fire interrupts. Fire weakens." His hand trembled as he underlined the words again and again. He remembered the woman's plea before she was taken. Burn it. The meeting house. The crown. The meeting house had been the center of their gatherings, the stage for the final hymn. Perhaps destruction of that sacred ground would disrupt the force's hold. He knew the cost might be his own life, yet what remained of his rational mind told him this valley would not be contained. If he left without action, it would spread. As he struck his flint to prepare a second blaze, the humming returned, deeper than before, vibrating through the walls, the benches, the very bones of the building. The congregation outside answered in unison, their sway intensifying, their rhythm no longer patient but urgent. Something was coming, summoned by his defiance. And then, from beneath the floorboards, the glow rose again, pale, pulsing like a heartbeat of the earth itself. This time, it did not stop at light. Shapes began to form, pressing upward through the cracks. Hands without fingers, faces without features, shifting bodies clawing their way into the room. And as Elias lifted the flame toward the dry timbers, he knew he had only moments before they reached him. The air thickened with a pulse that did not belong to wind or fire, but to something older, something living beneath the bones of the village. The boards quaked, splitting open as featureless shapes pressed upward, their blank heads straining for air they did not need. Their bodies glistened, not with sweat or blood, but with a sheen like damp clay. Elias forced himself to keep the flame steady, even as his arm shook with the weight of his decision. He thought of the woman he'd tried to save, of the plea etched into her fading features. Burn it. He struck the match against the timber, and fire caught greedily, racing along the dry beams. Heat seared his face, smoke clawing his lungs. The congregation outside did not break formation, but their swaying grew frantic, their rhythm syncing with the roar of the flames, as though the ritual itself adapted to incorporate destruction. The crowned figure, however, stepped forward at last. Its massive silhouette filled the doorway, root crown glowing faintly from the embers that still smoldered upon it. The faceless head turned toward him, and Elias staggered as the weight of its will pressed into his skull. Not the soft persuasion he had felt before, but a crushing command. Kneel, yield, erase yourself. His knees buckled, sweat dripping into his eyes, but the fire's crackle gave him something to anchor against. The flames were no longer just destruction. They were resistance embodied. The dog hurled itself between Elias and the crowned figure, barking with a ferocity that seemed to echo the fire itself. For the first time, the figure recoiled, its faceless form quivering at the animal's defiance. Elias realized with a surge of grim triumph that simple living will, unclouded by thought or faith, unsettled the thing. He stumbled toward the altar where his journal lay open. Pages fluttered violently in the heated air, but one line burned into his vision. Fire weakens, fire frees. With trembling hands, he thrust the burning brand into the glow seeping through the floorboards. The effect was immediate. The faceless shapes shrieked without mouths, a sound that pierced his mind like needles. Their clay-like forms blackened, cracked, and collapsed back into the void below. The floorboards sealed themselves once more, though the light beneath still pulsed faintly. The crowned figure did not retreat. Instead, it extended one long arm, pointing directly at Elias. The firelight revealed marks etched into its featureless surface, lines that shifted and crawled like living scars. Slowly they formed words. His name again, Elias Corbin, carved in fire-red streaks across its chest. His breath caught. It was no longer trying to erase him blindly. It had chosen him specifically. He was not merely an intruder to be punished. He was the next vessel, the next prize for its congregation. His thoughts spiraled between defiance and despair. Could he escape the valley? Was escape even possible, or had the world already ended beyond these woods? He pressed his hand against his satchel, feeling the solid weight of his journal. If nothing else, the record had to survive, even if he did not. His duty shifted from saving lives to preserving truth. The dog barked again, this time toward the rear door. Elias understood the command, flee. Clutching the journal, he stumbled through the smoke, forcing himself into the open air. Behind him, the meeting house roared with fire, beams collapsing under the strain. Yet as he looked back, he saw the crowned figure walk calmly through the flames, untouched, its root crown blazing brighter. And as Elias realized fire alone could not destroy it, he understood. The thing had now marked him as its own. The weight of that truth bore down heavier than the flames. Elias staggered through the smoky air, clutching his journal to his chest, as if the pages themselves might anchor him to what remained of his identity. The crowned figure moved steadily behind him, never rushing, never faltering. Its patience was worse than pursuit. It knew he could not run forever. The dog barked furiously, darting ahead toward the edge of the village, but Elias's lungs burned with smoke and exhaustion. He stumbled into the open square where the congregation had gathered once more. They stood in perfect ranks, faceless heads tilted upward as if awaiting benediction. Yet when Elias entered their midst, every head turned toward him in unison, not toward the crowned figure behind him, toward him. His knees nearly gave way. He understood now. He was not simply marked, he was being offered. The faceless swayed as though in prayer, their silent devotion directed at his unwilling body. The crowned figure's voice, or thought or pressure, pressed into his skull like iron. Kneel, become, complete the circle. He shook violently, forcing himself to stand straighter, though every muscle screamed to collapse. His thoughts scrambled for escape, for anything that might disrupt the ritual. His eyes fell on the dog, teeth bared, fur bristling. Its raw will had unsettled the figure before. If an animal's instinct could wound it, perhaps his own unbroken will could hold it at bay. He shouted aloud, his voice cracking but resolute, "I am not yours." The words echoed, not strong but defiant. For an instant, the congregation froze mid-sway. The crowned figure tilted its head, unreadable. Then, with terrifying calm, it extended its arm. From the faceless ranks, two figures lurched forward, moving with jerks like broken marionettes. They carried objects Elias recognized with a sick twist of his stomach, his own belongings, his doctor's bag, his pocket watch, even the pen he had left days before in another house. One by one, they laid them at his feet, as though preparing a shrine. Elias's breath caught. This was not temptation, it was erasure. To strip him of the objects that tethered him to memory, to self, until only the faceless obedience remained. Rage welled up in him, a heat stronger than fear. He snatched the pen from the dirt, clutching it like a weapon, ink-stained and useless though it was. The crowned figure stepped closer, fire still smoldering in its root crown. Elias's body quaked with the pressure of its command. His vision blurred at the edges, his own thoughts drowning in the rhythm of the congregation. But then the dog leapt, teeth sinking into the woven roots of the crown. The figure reeled, not in agony but in surprise. The pressure lifted for a heartbeat. Elias seized it. He drove the pen into his own palm, blood welling instantly. Pain grounded him, sharp and undeniable. He pressed his bloody hand against the journal's pages, smearing crimson across his frantic notes. "I am Elias Corbin," he gasped aloud. "I will not be unmade." The congregation shuddered, their sway disrupted. For the first time, discord rippled through their perfect rhythm. The crowned figure loomed higher, its faceless head twisting unnaturally, and Elias knew his defiance had wounded it, but not destroyed it. The ground trembled beneath his feet, the soil cracking as though something vast stirred below. He clutched his journal tighter, dragging himself backward toward the forest's edge. The crowned figure raised both arms now, summoning, commanding. The congregation began to advance, and as the first faceless hand reached for him, Elias realized the next struggle would be flesh against flesh. The touch came cold, clammy, like damp earth given form. He tore his arm free, stumbling backward as another faceless shape lunged. Their movements were uneven, not quite human, yet strong, stronger than desperation should allow. Elias swung his satchel wildly, the heavy journal inside striking one across the head. The faceless staggered but did not fall, only tilting its featureless face toward him with a patience that chilled his blood. The dog leapt again, teeth sinking into a faceless arm. The thing convulsed, not in pain but in confusion, before flinging the animal aside with terrifying force. Elias shouted, panic searing his throat, and scrambled to drag the dog up. It limped, growling, but its eyes still blazed with defiance. Around them, the congregation closed in, a circle of blank faces and swaying bodies, their rhythm collapsing into chaotic hunger. Elias's mind raced. He could not fight them all. His only chance was escape, but the forest loomed too far, and the crowned figure stood between him and the trees, arms raised, its crown blazing brighter now, like roots soaked in firelight. Desperation lent him clarity. He dropped to one knee, smearing his bloody palm across the earth. "I am Elias Corbin," he cried again, forcing the words through smoke-choked breath. "You will not take me." The congregation faltered, their advance hesitating, as if the sound of a name cut through the ritual. But the crowned figure only tilted its head, and then, with deliberate calm, it lowered its arms. At once, the faceless ceased their assault. They stood frozen, statues of clay and silence, the valley holding its breath. Elias felt the pressure in his skull shift, no longer the crushing command to kneel, but something subtler. An invitation. From the ground before him, the soil split open. A hollow yawned wide, revealing a narrow stair of roots descending into darkness. The crowned figure gestured not with command, but with expectation. It wanted him to enter. His journal later bore the line, "The valley itself seeks audience. I am no longer hunted, I am summoned." He trembled on the edge of the pit, torn between dread and the gnawing compulsion to know. If fire could not destroy it, if flight was impossible, then perhaps truth lay below. Perhaps the final answer waited in that root-choked descent. His physician's mind clung to the thought, observe, record, survive. If he did not enter, would the valley ever let him leave? The dog growled low, tail rigid, refusing to approach the pit. Elias knelt, whispering, "Stay. If I don't return, you must carry the truth." The absurdity of speaking duty to an animal nearly broke him, yet the steadiness in its eyes gave him courage. He descended. The roots closed behind him, sealing the way back. The air thickened, damp and electric, each breath heavy as though he inhaled through water. The humming returned, deeper now. 1,000 voices blended into one, vibrating through marrow and nerve. At the base of the passage, he entered a cavern vast and unnatural. The walls pulsed with faint light, as though veins of the earth carried a sickly glow. And there, at the cavern's center, he saw them, the Shakers, rows upon rows, kneeling in silence, their faces blurred to smooth clay. Yet within the faceless crowd, some twitched, their heads jerking as though fragments of will still fought against the erasure. Above them, entwined in a lattice of roots, hung something immense. Neither tree nor man, but a fusion of both, its form branching and human all at once, its faceless head crowned with roots that spread into the cavern ceiling. Elias felt his body weaken as it turned toward him, every fiber of his being recoiling from recognition. And as its vast, faceless gaze fell upon him, Elias realized this was no servant, it was the source. The presence bore down on him with a gravity that was not physical but absolute, the kind of weight that crushed thought itself. His knees quivered, threatening collapse, though he fought to remain standing. The cavern seemed to breathe with it, the walls pulsing in rhythm to its silent regard. This was what the Shakers had sung to, what they had surrendered their faces and names to. Not God, not madness, but something rooted in earth and hunger. The faceless Shakers knelt in unbroken rows, their bodies swaying faintly like stalks in a poisoned wind. Yet here and there Elias saw twitching, fingers curling, shoulders jerking, as though fragments of self still resisted. He gripped his journal tighter, every fiber of his being urging him to record, to name this truth so it would not die with him. His pen scratched violently. Source is vast, neither human nor divine. Feeds on surrender, devours self, leaves husk. The towering figure shifted, its crown of roots extending through the cavern like veins. Elias felt the pressure in his mind intensify, not the crushing demand of the crowned emissary above the earth, but something more insidious, an invitation to dissolve, to let go, to join the endless rows of faceless and be freed from the agony of resisting. For a moment, one terrible, treacherous moment, he felt tempted. The pain of fear, the exhaustion of defiance, the weight of knowledge all pressed him toward surrender. To kneel, to let it take his name, would be so much easier. But then he heard it, a sound faint and ragged, hidden among the chorus of silence. A whisper, human. Elias. His name, spoken not by the source, but from within the crowd of kneeling shakers. He strained his ears. Another voice followed, weaker still. Do not kneel. His heart surged. They weren't all gone. Some fragment of humanity lingered, trapped but not erased. His defiance was not alone. The source shuddered at the ripple of resistance, roots tightening against the cavern walls. The glow dimmed for an instant before flaring brighter, angry. It pressed harder into his skull, urging him to kneel, to silence those voices forever. Elias clenched his teeth, forcing his own voice to rise against it. I am Elias Corbin, I am not yours. His cry echoed through the cavern, striking like a crack across still water. The faceless twitched violently, many collapsing forward as though stunned. The whispers grew louder, multiplying, weak, broken, but growing. Not his, not ours. Resist. The source writhed, roots tearing from stone, its faceless head twisting with fury. Elias felt the earth tremble. He stumbled, catching himself on the altar-like stone at the cavern's center. There, etched deep into the rock, were markings he recognized from the graveyard, circles intersected by lines. Only now did he see their purpose, a binding, an ancient warning left by hands that had faced this before. His journal trembled in his grip as he scrawled, "It has been fought. It can be bound, but never destroyed." The dog's distant bark echoed faintly from above, as if reminding him the world still waited beyond this tomb. He forced himself upright, bloodied hand pressed against the ancient carvings. "If you want me," he whispered through clenched teeth, "you will have to take me whole." The source surged forward, its faceless expanse blotting out light. Roots coiled toward him, curling like serpents, ready to seize him, ready to unmake him. Elias braced himself, journal clutched to his chest like a shield. And as the roots closed in around him, Elias realized the valley would not let him leave alive. The tendrils constricted like serpents, wrapping his arms, pinning his chest, forcing his journal against him as if mocking the one object he had preserved. The cavern thundered with the pulsing hum of the source, its faceless enormity pressing against the edges of his mind. The whispers of resistance that had risen only moments before were now drowned beneath a tidal wave of silence, each voice smothered until only his remained. But Elias clung to that voice with desperation, his own name repeating in his head like a mantra. Elias Corbin, doctor, witness, not yours. He forced the words past clenched teeth, even as the roots squeezed tighter, cutting off breath. His blood smeared across the carvings on the altar stone, filling the grooves of the ancient sigils. The rock pulsed in response, faintly at first, then brighter, resonating with a rhythm distinct from the source's oppressive hum. The valley shuddered. The source recoiled, its vast, faceless form writhing as the sigils blazed with stolen blood. Elias realized then the carvings were not warnings but locks, locks that had been broken when the shaker's devotion fed the hunger beneath. His blood, his defiance, had begun to restore them. The roots constricted further, but cracks splintered along their bark-like surfaces. The whispers of resistance flared again, louder now, swelling from dozens of throats. Not his, not ours, not yours. The faceless congregation twitched violently, some collapsing into stillness, others clawing at their own blurred features as if straining to reclaim what was taken. Elias gasped, vision dimming, but he pressed his hand harder against the altar, smearing what little blood he had left into the sigils. The glow intensified, spreading across the cavern walls like fire in reverse, cold light banishing shadow. The source let out a soundless scream, a vibration so violent it rattled the marrow in his bones. Roots tore free from the ceiling, lashing wildly. In that chaos, Elias saw the truth. He could not destroy it, but he could trap it again. The cost, however, was evident in every breathless convulsion of his lungs. His life was the price, his journal the only witness left to speak. With the last of his strength, he hurled the blood-streaked journal into a crevice beyond the altar, wedging it between the glowing roots. Then he surrendered not to the source, but to his own will. "I am Elias Corbin," he cried one final time, voice breaking against the roar, "and I will not kneel." The cavern erupted in blinding light. The faceless congregation crumpled as though strings had been cut, their bodies collapsing into clay and dust. The source writhed, its vast crown splintering, its faceless enormity dissolving into the soil. The roots around Elias tightened one last time and then released. When the light dimmed, the cavern was empty. The dog barked faintly from above, a sound distant and muffled, as though carried on wind across water. Elias's body lay still upon the altar stone, his blood seared into the sigils. His journal, wedged deep in the crevice, remained untouched by fire or rot. Years later, when wanderers stumbled upon the valley, they found only ruins. The houses stood but lifeless. The meeting house, a blackened shell. Of the Shaker community, no trace remained, save for a single leather journal buried beneath a collapsed stone. Its pages told of a physician who had witnessed the valley's hunger, who had defied it and who had sealed it away once more. But some pages, scorched at the edges, bore words too fractured to interpret. Lines that spoke of whispers still alive, roots that never stopped growing, and a presence waiting with patience beyond years. The valley remains abandoned. No birds sing there, no animals linger long. Travelers speak of hearing faint humming beneath the soil, or glimpsing pale figures swaying in the mist. Some dismiss it as folklore, a story meant to keep the curious away, but others read Elias Corbin's journal and wonder, was the source truly bound, or simply biding its time until another voice breaks the silence? The story of Harmony Hollow ends unresolved, a wound in history left raw. Perhaps Elias bought the world time, perhaps he only fed the valley once more. What do you believe? Was the physician's sacrifice enough to end the hunger, or does the faceless congregation still wait in the mist? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories, because some mysteries never rest, and the truth is often far more terrifying than fiction.